So like I said, this is a presentation on business process automation. My name is Kevin Annfield. I'm a consultant with OBS. I've been here for about nearly 3 years. I mainly focus on business process automation. There's not too much more other things that I do, but I am a general SharePoint consultant. I know my way around that, and also CRM fairly well. Throughout this, we'll be going over what business process automation is and what tools we have at our disposal to help us automate our business processes. What are some of the common issues that we see when we discuss business processes with our clients? And what do we do about starting to develop automated business processes? Throughout the session, if you do have any questions, you should have a question pane in the GoToWebinar panel. Please answer questions, or hopefully I'll be able to answer the questions. Ask questions in there, and if they're relevant to what we're talking about right then and there, then I'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll wait until the end and I'll get back to you then. So, just a bit of a follow-up. I'm not sure how many of the people that are out there went and listened in on Aaron Dinnage's presentation on a bit of an introduction to business process automation. But one of the things that he covered was what BPA is, or business process automation is. It's the automation of processes within an organisation to reduce costs, improve efficiency, and eliminate errors. So each one of those we'll try and focus on, and we'll talk about each one of those as we go. But it is really important to have a good understanding of what business process automation is, so we can make sure that we're talking about the right thing. So what we'll go into first is what tools we have available to help us automate our business processes. There are lots and lots out there. There are ones built into SharePoint and CRM. Most of the things that I talk about now will be about SharePoint, but do know that there are some really, really good, powerful ways to automate business processes within CRM as well. There are some free applications that we can use, and there are also some third-party add-ons that can be used to help design and build and manage those business processes once you've got them going. So firstly, some built-in tools. So SharePoint 2010 has workflow built into the standard user interface that just about everybody can access. And what we're looking at here is the standard user interface to select a workflow template that's associated to a list. So you can't really do too much with that. You can get some sort of decent approval mechanism with that, but you can't really modify using the browser interface. You can't modify that workflow. Down on the left-hand side, we've got the workflow designer that's associated with CRM 2011. And you can see in there that you can actually do a fair bit. It actually looks very similar to one of the tools I'm just about to talk about, SharePoint Designer, in that you can get variables, you can ask people for information, you can get some sort of responses, all sorts of things. So those are the built-in tools, and you just need a certain level of, specifically with SharePoint, you just need a certain level of permissions to be able to do that. But most people would be able to set up a workflow on a library or a list and get things happening. Specifically, some Microsoft applications that you can use, SharePoint Designer 2010 being one of the free ones. You can set up and design a workflow or a more technical business process within Visio 2010, and then you can export that and make that exported file be the basis of a SharePoint Designer workflow. So what I've got here is a workflow diagram that I did up for a client that was going to be used to automate their business process of sending information around to different people. And when we imported that into SharePoint Designer, we got, this is just a very small part of it, but we got a framework that then allowed us to make sure that the logic was in the right order, and also then add in all of the different pieces of information that we need to look up, such as looking up different lists and logging entries to a history list and all of those kind of things. So using that, you can start to get a decent way of automating business processes, and you can get some fairly complex workflows built using SharePoint Designer, although there are some limitations, and the number of activities that you can choose from is fairly low compared to some of the other things that are out there. You've got about 40 activities that are in SharePoint Designer 2010. In addition to that, you've also got the product that you have to pay for, Visual Studio 2010, but you can design very complex workflows using code, using a designer in a way, but behind each one of these activities in this screenshot that I've got, there is code that you really have to set up and understand how to do. We can also see that, you know, there's a whole lot of different files that are associated to it and all sorts of things. Basically, you can do anything in Visual Studio 2010 workflow, and really the world's your oyster. You can go absolutely crazy, and I've seen some pretty big workflows in that. The really interesting thing though is that I've seen workflows that are built in Visual Studio 2010 that you could do just as easily in a third-party tool such as an Intex workflow. In addition to that, for those people that don't want to spend the money on Intex workflow, it is a cost. There are some free add-ins that you can get for SharePoint Designer, but they really don't do all of the same things that you can do in Intex workflow. And like I've got there, it is the third most used, it is the most used third-party tool for SharePoint 2010 as measured by Forrester's survey last year. And that's really interesting to know that a business process automation tool is the most used third-party tool within SharePoint. So it's obviously something that's important for a lot of different people all around the world. And then there are some add-ons that you can also get for an Intex Workflow 2010 specifically for Project Server, as well as some different products that we'll talk about coming up soon. So a bit of a short summary on the tools that we've got available. So there are obviously a variety of tools. There are also tools that are out there for SharePoint that are built by other vendors. There are some some tools outside of SharePoint and CRM that could be used if you've got very complex enterprise-wide business process needs that need to interact with many different systems. Then it's very important to make sure that you use the right tool for the job. And sometimes, you know, taking my hat off as a SharePoint BPA guy, sometimes there are other tools out there that may be better off. But for most of the business processes that I see as a specialist consultant, just about everything that I've seen can be used or can be solved using Intex Workflow and some smarts. So going through the tools that we've just looked at quickly, we've got the standard user interface tools, SharePoint Designer and list workflows and other types of workflows in that, Intex Workflow, which we'll look at a little bit more in detail later on, and then Visual Studio Workflow as well, which is obviously highly complex, but very powerful. So moving on from that, I'd like to talk about some of the typical issues that we see when we go out and see our customers, and these are just some of the really important points that we see and that we like talking to our customers about when we start to get engaged in a business process automation engagement. Somebody's just put a question up, which is a good point to raise right here. With SharePoint 2010, SharePoint Designer 2010 and Visio 2010, you do need the Visio Enterprise version, and there are definitely some limitations in what you can do when you bring a workflow over from Visio into SharePoint Designer. So thanks for the person who put that up, Damien. So moving on from that and looking at these issues, so we always see issues around data capture, and that's really how do we get the information in to start our process, the processing of that information once we've got it. So, you know, how do we move it around an organisation? Typically, you know, you'd fill out a piece of paper and pick that up and move it around an organisation. And then there's some sort of reporting that needs to happen at the end of our process, or as an overall look at the whole process, to understand how the performance is, how it's performing, and if there are any slow points or things that we can make more efficient. So getting into some more information on those. So data capture is all about, changing from the old school paper form where people write on and, there's no validation or anything like that. It's really a huge improvement once you start going into an electronic form to start capturing that data. With paper forms, you always miss information. Especially if someone like me was filling out one of these forms, I'm sure most people would find my handwriting unreadable. And I know that happens a hell of a lot out there that I see. And like I said, there's just no validation of data. You can't confirm that somebody has the right amount of leave when they're filling out a leave form while they're filling in a paper form. There's just no way to validate that data that people are putting in. And even Homer knows that paper forms are old school. So once we start talking about information processing, this is workflow. But information processing, is how the information in those paper forms is moved around the organisation. It's inefficient when people lose forms, and the issue always comes up where somebody fills in a leave form, but payroll don't take that leave out of their pay because the form is lost. There's absolutely no accountability in these manual processes where people walk forms around. We can't tell if somebody has replied to a task, or if they've actually looked at the form to approve it. And there's no way that we can track who has answered those tasks or who has done what they're supposed to do. And what we see here on the screen is a very typical business process diagram that we would see when we go into an organisation, that it's our job to ask a whole lot of questions around all of those, in this case blue and white boxes, to ensure that we understand everything that goes in there. This particular one is a workflow or business process diagram for a travel workflow. And then what do we do once we've got this automated process happening? How do we know that it's working? How can we tell that this is doing what we want it to do? And this isn't necessarily from a technical point of view. It's more from a business point of view. Is the workflow doing what we designed it to do? Is the process working efficiently? And if it's not, then what do we need to do to assist it along to make it more efficient? And some of the things that you can look at with the products that are out there are the average response times for tasks, the total time it takes for a workflow to run through. And this usually, the reporting phase is the last that we would do as part of a business process automation engagement. Sometimes it's very important to understand the requirements right at the start of the engagement with a view to doing that later on in those phases. This screen that I've got here is just a typical workflow history screen of Nintex workflow, which we'll look at in a little bit. So, like I said, there are a huge variety of issues that come up. It's really imperative to completely understand all of the issues before we start a business process automation engagement. It really needs a lot of thought from both parties, from both us and a client, to make sure that we understand everything involved with everything to do with that particular process, and also how that process relates to other processes that might occur within the business. And then using some of the tools that are available, I'm sure some people out there would be able to very quickly pick up and start automating a fairly simple process in SharePoint Designer. Or it may be that the SharePoint user interface workflow is that the built-in workflow is fine for some people's solutions or some people's requirements. So once we understand those issues, it's really important to start solving them. It's all good and well to build this big requirements document, to understand our process in this really complex business process diagram. But if we're not going to start automating them, then what have we done other than fully understanding our process? And although the issues that I've shown have been shown separately, they really need to be considered together. Data capture always leads to some sort of information processing, and from that information processing in the workflow, we always want to know how our workflow is performing. And obviously there's a whole lot of work that's required to understand the complete process, from the time somebody starts, requests a leave, to them taking that leave, and the leave coming out, their leave entitlements coming out of their pay, and all of those kind of things. So it really is an end-to-end requirement that we need to go through. So there are specific tools that we can use for capturing that data, specifically in a SharePoint sense. There are SharePoint list forms. This is a standard task form as part of SharePoint 2010. And we can capture all of those things that we need to use as part of our process. On top of that, you can then start, depending on your licensing that you use, you can then start customizing those list forms using InfoPath. So you can start to get some slightly better and more advanced forms using SharePoint list forms, as well as SharePoint library forms. And those are the ones, that's what this screenshot is here of, is where this particular one is a travel request where we can add in multiple legs of a trip. And that you can do. It would be possible but very hard to do in a SharePoint list form, but very easy to do in an InfoPath form to make sure that all of the different types of data is captured. On top of that, we can then start to use some third-party tools such as Nintex forms, which is what we'll look at a little bit later on, and I'll get you guys to use and interact with. And that's all about designing forms within a browser, much like Nintex Workflow is designing and building workflows within the browser. Nintex Forms allows you to do the same thing. It's aimed at a slightly different user to InfoPath, and the things that we can do in Nintex Forms are definitely different from Nintex Forms and InfoPath. We can also do some really cool things like allow anonymous access into forms. We can allow mobile access to forms, which is hopefully what you guys will be able to do once we start getting into the demo component of this webinar. We can then also, speaking specifically in CRM, and the reason for bringing up CRM is that most people know it, or some people would know it as a structured way to build applications that use relational or relationships between different data entities. But you can use it as, once you have that data in your system, you can use it to run workflows and to capture information. And even the standard CRM forms can get incredibly complex with JavaScript and jQuery and all of those types of things. Or we can use some of the built-in features of CRM 2011 to use CRM dialogues, which is an initial way to start a process within CRM. And that's just a way, this screenshot here shows we're creating a client, and then we need to relate that to a parent client. And you can build those relationships pretty easily within CRM dialogues. So if there are people out there that are looking at or do have CRM, then the dialogues way of starting a process is a really nice way. Then obviously we have tools for information processing, and that's where we know of things like Nintex Workflow, and in addition Nintex Live. Nintex Workflow, obviously, it installs into SharePoint and allows you to build incredibly complex workflows within the browser that most people access every day. It's fully integrated within SharePoint. You can do just about any SharePoint functionality within Nintex Workflow. There are over 100 actions, depending on the version of Nintex Workflow that you have. And just in that screenshot that you can hopefully see, we can see that there's the ability to create a CRM record. We can execute SQL queries. We can query LDAP or Active Directory. So there's a lot of different integration points that you can have with all sorts of different systems out there. And like I said, it's a very easy to use visual designer. And although I'm not a programmer, or I came from a business analysis perspective, I do like technical things, and it allows me to do a lot of the things that programmers do with code, but I do it with pictures in a page. Then in addition to Nintex workflow, we can get something called Nintex Live, which allows us to use some of the cloud services that people are starting to develop. And what I was hoping to be able to show you once we start on our next slide, actually getting into some sort of demo with Nintex Workflow and Nintex Forms, is so you can understand how we might be able to interact with an external service. And in our case, that's going to be a Google service and a Bing service. It's a little bit fun, but hopefully you'll be able to get some ideas about how you guys might be able to use that within your environments, and something to talk to our business development managers when they come and visit you, obviously. So let's get into a small little demo that I've built that will hopefully be able to show you some of the things that we can do with these products that I've been talking about. Once we finish this demo, I'll quickly run over a typical engagement, a typical business process and automation engagement that you may have with OBS. And then obviously we can follow up with any questions, and I can get into some more detail about Nintex Workflow, and we can do a bit more of a demo with that. So just quickly, hopefully most people out there, I assume if you've connected to this webinar, you can get internet access. You should be able to see a URL on the screen. If you would like to go to that URL, now it is case sensitive. So you do need to make sure that the H and the O are in capitals. If you'd like to go to that, I'd love to be able to have it so you could click on that link, but I wasn't able to get that done. So if you do go to that link, I'll just click on it from my end. That will bring up a form that I've designed using Nintex Forms. Now, if I was to access that on an iPhone or an iPad, I would get a slightly different version that's specifically made for that particular device. If anybody's out there with an iPad, you can do it right now, but I was wanting to just show you how easy it is to add those forms. So you may not get the full experience with an iPad right now, but we can try it in a few minutes if you'd like. So this is an Nintex form that is an input form for this SharePoint list. Now I've hidden a few columns just to protect the people that are out there, but basically it's asking for, and now just to put it out there, this isn't something that I want to use to start spamming email to you and all those kind of things. But what will happen if you enter some information into that form, and I'll just go back to the PowerPoint so you can get the URL. What will happen is you put in your first or your full name details, an email address, and the city and country and state that you're in. That will, using Nintex Live, allow you to submit a list item anonymously into my development environment. Once that happens, a workflow will start, and it will go out and use the Bing News search service, which is using Nintex Live, to get the news for your city, and then also use a Google weather service to get the current weather and conditions, and then reply back to your email with that information formatted a little bit nicely. So what you'll end up getting is something that looks a little bit like this email here. This is one that I ran while I was getting everything organised. But we can see here that it's got news for Sydney and all those kind of things. So let's fill that out. Whoops. This one. Fill that out again for myself. And by all means, if you don't want to fill this in, that's fine. But I'm using my Gmail account here just so it's a little bit easy to show you. Please don't sign me up to anything with my Gmail account. So I want to be in Perth this time, and that's obviously in Western Australia, and we'll save that. So using Nintex Live, I haven't needed to authenticate my system doesn't know who this is. All it knows is that that form has been submitted. I'll just refresh this screen, and nobody else out there has submitted anything yet that has come through onto my system. Hopefully we'll start to see some things soon. Once those items do come in, a workflow will start to run, and that workflow looks a little bit like this here. Just make sure that everybody can see what I'm looking at. Okay, so this is the typical Nintex workflow design interface, which has some actions that do some things for us. And then in each one of those actions, there are some settings that allow us to set things up. And as you can see over here, there are, like I said, over 100 actions of ways that you can interact with everything to do with SharePoint and other systems. You can also see there is the ability to write custom actions, which are some actions that some of our developers have written. And you can do looping mechanisms. These are some of the actions that you can use with Nintex Live. And Nintex Live has a catalogue of, currently there's about 30 different actions, actually more than that now. It keeps on growing. I'll just bring that up so you can see that. So these are some of the actions that we can start to use with our workflows. Now, a lot of these are, the social types of aspects, but let's get it more into a business context. Let's say you've got an Office 365 instance that's used for a worldwide access into your SharePoint environment, and you need a way to build some sort of integration between your SharePoint that you've got within your business and Office 365 that might be used for specific circumstances. Using Nintex Live, we can create items in the Office 365 instance. We can create sites, we can delete items. We can also even query a list. So we can, there's a SharePoint list out there on the cloud using Office 365. We can query that and bring in some information from that Office 365 site into our environment, and then start to process that using Nintex Workflow. So we'll just go back and hopefully there's at least, there we go. Thanks very much for filling that out, everybody. So once we can see here in this Get News and Weather column that our workflow is in progress, and I'll just go to mine. Thankfully I can tell which mine is. I'll just do this on another screen so we don't see everybody's details. Excuse me a second. I'm sure everybody's not too keen on everybody seeing who else is on here. So I'll just bring up the workflow history screen, and we can see inside that, this is the workflow history for my entry. That green, the green box means that that process is finished, and the orange box means that this process is still going on. So what's happening with Nintex Live is that all that's happened, all that our workflow has done, and all that our system knows about, is it sent a request off to the Bing News Search service to say, get me the news for Perth, my city. It then goes and processes, Nintex Live then goes and processes that information. Our workflow doesn't need to worry about what happens if that service, that Bing News service, is unavailable. What happens if it takes too long to process? All these kinds of things that we, as workflow designers and as business process people, we shouldn't need to worry about that. All we want to do is request some information and then bring that information back once it's available. So I'll just refresh the screen again, and hopefully now we've got a few more green boxes saying that we've now got our weather, we've got our news. It's done some things to the news to make sure it's formatted well, some technical collection operation and array operation. It's shortening a URL for us, again, just so I could show you some of the things that you could do, and this will turn it into a special Google URL for the news item. And now my notification's been sent, so I'll just bring up my email again. Excuse me a sec. And there we can see, once it comes up on your screen, sorry about moving windows around, I just prefer to not show you some of the things that's in my email. But there we can see, we've got for the city of Perth, we've got a news headline, a bit of a snippet about the news, and then the ability for me to click on the shortened email. I'll just bring it back up on the screen, for us to then view that particular news story. And then also some current weather. It's raining in Perth. Hopefully there's nobody on the call that's in Perth and having to suffer with rain while it's nice and blue skies in Brisbane. So where I see something like this really being useful, and where I've implemented it for one customer in the past, is as part of a wider travel process. So we have a person who needs to travel to China, for example, and they'd like to know what the weather's going to be like when they land. So we go through the typical travel approval process of getting the manager to approve our travel, making sure that it's within cost, talking to a travel agent to get the right itinerary, and then we get our e-ticket and I'm a traveller. Now tomorrow I'm going to be landing in Shanghai, and I'd like to know what the weather's going to be in Shanghai once I get there. We could set up our workflow to pause until the day before the travel is due, go out and do this do this request of information using Nintex Live, format it in a nice email so it's it's nice and readable for our traveller, and then allow them to see up-to-date information either when they land or before they leave. It just allows you to do some slightly nicer things rather than just saying, there's your ticket, see you later. You can provide a little bit more information to travellers in this instance. But you could do this in lots of different ways using the standard Nintex Live actions that are available. So I'll just see quickly if there are any questions. Excuse me. So there was a question about, by CRM, do I mean the Microsoft Dynamics CRM? Definitely. Just quickly on CRM, it's always been advertised as a sales system for a sales organisation, but we're seeing more and more that people need the ability to very quickly build very complex applications, and those applications can be built in CRM. And Microsoft are starting to use or have used the moniker XRM for a long time. The X meaning, it can be an anything application builder or an anything relationship management system. And we've got CRM being used by very large organisations for managing lots of different, people type or company types and franchise organisations and all of those kinds of things. Just quickly check for more questions. No. So just flick back to our presentation. So we'll go into a little bit more detail of Nintex workflow. I am running a little bit ahead of schedule, but I'm sure everybody would be keen if needed to head off early. So some of the things that we normally do in a very typical business process automation engagement, we always run some sort of workshop to understand the process. And most of the time that's trying to understand all of the what if questions. What if a person doesn't respond to a task? What if a person doesn't exist? We put in a standard full name, person name, and that person doesn't exist. What do we do then? We also ask a lot of questions, especially if there is an integration need, about how do we integrate with that other system. Can we use web services? Can we query a database, a SQL database or an Oracle database directly? So there's always a lot of questions about understanding the process as a whole, but then also asking all of those additional questions around how is this process, this automated process going to work, so human involvement is lessened as much as possible. We then go off and build those business requirements in a design document. We then build, and if you've read down my points, I've got this word communicate spread throughout all of the different points, and I think it's one of the most important things that we can do as workflow builders and consultants, and you as customers, to ensure that the communication of this process, of this automated process, is it's put out there to the people who are going to be using this process as much as possible. It's really important to, and this point is always overlooked. If people involved in the process aren't told about this new workflow and their part in it, then typically they won't respond. Either they won't respond or they won't respond quick enough. Now, we might have a task that's assigned to somebody that we're expecting them to respond within a day, so we might send a reminder within a day. If this person starts to get reminders every day for a week, they're going to start to get really annoyed that well, why wasn't I told about this new workflow? What do I need to do? What's my part in this process? And that's one of the really important things as we start to do larger business process automation engagements, is to make sure that everybody who's going to be involved in this process is communicated to. So, after we build, we'd obviously do some testing and always get users involved. These might be typical users of a data capture form, or it might be typical users of that process as the information moves around. It might be some managers to make sure that that they can approve their task and they understand the words in the email. Sometimes I've spent nearly 2 hours discussing with a client about the right way to word a notification email that goes to a manager to ensure that, one, it has all of the information that they need, but two, so it doesn't come across demanding. So it's written nicely and all of those kind of things, and they can take some time. You could just put a single line email that says, please approve this task, but without any context around it, it makes it much harder for those people to do it, and you will definitely get a much higher adoption level once people are communicated to. So we then move our solution into a production environment, do some more testing, do some more communicating, and then typically we would train some people in both what needs to happen to start the process. How do we put the information into a form? Hopefully we've designed our form well enough that we don't need to train people how to use a form. But sometimes forms can get fairly complex and you do need to do those kinds of things. And then, it's about communicating again to everybody out there that there is this new leave process, or there is this new travel process, and this new form that people need to start using. So as a bit of a summary, business process automation is really a specific stream. I believe it needs specialist skills and some good experience of the way other organisations typically use business processes. There are many times that I've walked into an organisation, and other consultants have walked into organisations, and we'll start sitting down and understanding their process, and we'll see or know that this type of process comes up a lot, and some ways that we might be able to talk about how to make that process more efficient before we start automating, and then some of those things that we can use once we start building a workflow or a form that we've seen before and that we've done before. There are many, many issues that we've seen and hopefully solved fairly well, and many issues in the future that we'll be able to solve as well. One of the most exciting things about all of this for me is seeing a business process that's been automated that really makes people's lives easier. Sometimes with a lot of the stuff that we do, it's very hard to see how things that we build make somebody's life easier. But if somebody, all they need to fill in for taking leave is 5 boxes on a screen, instantly their manager gets asked, can you approve this leave? The manager just needs to reply to that email and say yes, and then that process is then finalised. Seeing that kind of interaction for me as a consultant is really satisfying, and for customers is really easy for them to see the return on their investment for our time and the products that they've chosen. And then also, obviously, there are decisions that are always required to ensure the right tool is used. Hand on heart, sometimes an in-text workflow isn't the right tool for some things. I've spoken to our developers about some of the things that I've automated in Nintex workflow, and there are many times when they raise their eyebrows and go, wow, we should have done that in code, or we should have done this kind of solution for it. But Nintex workflow can do a lot of things. Visual Studio workflow can do a lot of things. Even SharePoint Designer, using some complex and ways to talk to other workflows, you can build some complexity and looping and all of those kinds of things as well. But it's really, really important to make sure that you do use the right tool for the job. So a couple of takeaways. I'm not sure if anybody else was on Aaron's call in a couple of weeks ago, but I really liked his takeaway picture here. I'm a big coffee fan, so this is great for me. There are heaps of tools that we can use. You know, we spoke about using the SharePoint user interface, using SharePoint Designer and Visio, with that asterisk being it needs to be Visio Enterprise. We can use Nintex Workflow. We can download some free community developed add-ins for SharePoint Designer to enable us to do more things from Codeplex. Or, if you wanted to, we could look at other business process automation suites. And there are many, many out there that integrate with all different types of systems. There are definitely some common issues that we see. Those being, you know, data capture, how to process the information once it's captured, and what to do with that process once it's happened. And obviously there are heaps of different solutions that we can build using these topics that I've talked about. Before we keep going, I'd like to ask if there are any questions, and also I'd like to just tell people that when they do start disappearing off the call, that there is a survey that pops up. It would be really, really great, both for my feedback and the feedback for our webinars as we keep on doing them, to get some information from you. That information that you provided in that form, I'll go ahead and delete and ignore. But thank you for doing that, and I do hope that you got an email as part of that workflow. So I'm happy to stick around and show some more people, or show people around Nintex workflow if you wanted to get more technical, or anything else that I've covered. So we'll just see if there are any questions. No, and I can see some people dropping off. Hopefully those people are filling out their surveys as they disappear. So those people that are still on, thank you very much for taking part and listening to this webinar. There are my details. If you do have any questions specifically about workflow, then please shoot me an email and I'll see what I can do to either help you out or pass your query on. Obviously, those people that do have a relationship with a business development manager, please contact them to ask any further questions. Or if you don't have a relationship, please contact me and I'll pass your details on. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you learnt and enjoyed yourself.